We're going to go ahead and get started. Representative Owsley has to introduce a bill in a different committee today, and so he's going to be a few minutes late. So first off, do we have any requests for bill introductions? Nobody? Okay, thank you. So move right into the agenda today. We're opening the hearing. Okay, we'll open the hearing on House Bill 2004, creating the right to appeal an involuntary discharge or transfer from an adult residential care facility. We'll open up the proponents first, and up first we have Representative Ron Highland. Welcome to Children and Seniors, Representative Highland. Sorry, I've been corrected. Jesse, would you give us an overview of the bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that opportunity. Just as a reminder for everyone on the committee, bill briefs are being sent out a little earlier than just the time of the hearing. So in order to not commit any sort of meetings violation, I just ask that when these are sent out, members of the committee don't discuss the contents in groups that would violate the Meetings Act. So thank you so much for that time. Today, for House Bill 2004, that bill adds a section to the Adult Care Home Licensure Act. It creates requirements for involuntary transfers and discharges, as well as the right and process to appeal such transfer or discharge. Under subsection A, administrators or operators of adult residential care facilities must ensure that residents are not involuntarily transferred or discharged unless the transfer or discharge is necessary because the facility cannot meet the resident's needs, the health or safety of others are endangered, the resident has not paid charges after a reasonable notice, or the facility ceases to operate. Subsection B requires that the administrator or operator notify the resident and any other known legal representative of such an involuntary transfer or discharge and the reason for that, except when a facility ceases operations, if the transfer or discharge is for reasons in subsection A, the resident physician shall document the reasons why in the resident's clinical record. And that includes the rationale that the transfer or discharge is necessary for the resident's welfare and the resident's needs cannot be met by the facility. If the rationale of such transfer or discharge is appropriate because the resident's health has improved and the resident no longer needs services provided by that facility, or the rationale of such transfer or discharge is necessary to ensure the health or safety of individuals in that facility. So administrators and operators must provide a written notice of the transfer or discharge that includes the reason, the effective date of the transfer or discharge, the contact information of the state long-term care ombudsman, and the resident's right to appeal the involuntary transfer or discharge that is created under this section. If the resident has an intellectual or developmental disability, the notice should also include information regarding agencies responsible for the protection and advocacy of those individuals. And if the resident has a mental disorder, the notice shall include information of agencies similarly responsible to that resident as well. This notice shall be provided to the resident or the resident's legal representative at least 30 days prior to the transfer or discharge, unless the safety of others would be endangered or the resident's needs require immediate transfer to another healthcare facility. Under subsection D, before a discharge, the section will require that there is sufficient preparation and development of a discharge plan to be provided to that resident, and if practical, the resident's legal representative or designated family. Subsection E establishes the resident's right to appeal involuntary transfers or discharges that are in violation of this section, and they appeal that to the Secretary for Aging and Disability Services. So a notice of appeal must be filed with the Office of Administrative Hearings within 15 days of receiving the notice of the transfer or discharge. Then A hearing shall be held within 30 days of the notice of the appeal. When the appeal is pending, the resident is permitted to return and resume residency in the facility. This section authorizes the Secretary for Aging and Disability Services to adopt rules and regulations to implement and administer this section, and it would take effect upon publication in the statute book. I am ready for any questions concerning the language of House Bill 2004.
Jesse, committee, do we have questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, if they are dismissed from a facility, you know how word gets around, the next facility is not going to want them. Is there something that says they have to take them or anything?
This bill doesn't have any provisions regarding the need to take a resident. And since I'm a little green to this subject matter, I don't know any statutes related to requirements of taking residents, but I'm sure.
Does that kind of make sense, though?
Yes, definitely. I'm not aware of any statutes related to the admission of a transfer of a resident. Maybe the conferees who have been working in the field for a few years know how that process works or the requirements, but I can look through the statutes and get back to you, Representative.
And then secondly, is there a committee that decides whether they're discharged or they can stay, or is it a neutral statewide committee, or what? Who is this?
I'm not sure who makes the decision of whether a resident stays in that particular residential facility. That would be a statute I would also need to look at and get back to you on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I was thinking that there was something in the fiscal note that addressed that. Oh, well, we'll move on and try to catch up with that. Okay. Representative Wagner.
I'm hoping this is a question that isn't, beyond your area of knowledge, but as I understand it, this bill has to do with assisted living centers or something, and that already there exists a right of appeal for nursing home patients. And so if that is the case, is the bill 2004 modeled after what is currently used for regular nursing home residents, or am I just mistaken in my understanding?
Yes, Representative. As far as what I can answer in regards to that question is that this relates to adult care homes, and that's defined as any nursing facility for mental health, intermediate care facility for people with intellectual disability, assisted living facility, residential healthcare facility, home plus, boarding care home, and adult care facility. And I am not sure whether in this act there exists a current right to appeal of an involuntary discharge or transfer.
If I may, Madam Chairman, I think you misunderstood my question. Is this a totally unique bill in the area of nursing homes, or is this just an extension of an appeal right that is already granted to nursing home residents in other situations? I mean, I presume when you did the bill that if there was a similar bill that you had some reference to, but there is no similar bill?
So unfortunately, I did not draft this bill, so I'm not aware of any similar right to appeal to answer that at the moment.
I think our conferees might be able to address that, so thank you. Any other questions for Jesse? Okay, now it's time for Representative Highland. Welcome to Children and Seniors.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the committee members, thank you for allowing me to come in today to speak to you about House Bill 2004. As our new rules state in the House, I am bringing this bill forward as a request of a constituent. And to answer your question, there are federal laws that cover nursing homes, but the laws on state facilities, like assisted living facilities, they are not covered. So this is an extension and trying to fill that gap that has been void. Rachel M. Thurn, who you'll hear from after me, will fill you in on the details of what has happened. And when I was briefed on this, it alarmed me of how this was happening all over our state, that people were being evicted. They went for a doctor's appointment, for example, and when they came back, they were told they could not re-enter the facility. This goes on. So this bill is being brought forward for that reason, and we have not only Rachel M. Thurn, but we also have someone working in that industry that will be able to answer most all the questions, which I cannot at this point. With that, Madam Chair, I'll stand for questions.
I think, do you have a committee that you need to go to? Okay, so I was going to hold questions to the end, but the representative needs to go to his committee. Do we have any questions right now for Representative Highland? Okay, thanks for joining us and bringing us this bill.
Thank you for allowing me. Thank you.
So our next conferee is Rachel M. Thurn, private citizen. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Concannon and the committee. I very much appreciate this opportunity to speak with you today. Since we've labeled this Charlie's bill, I brought Charlie along so you could meet him. I don't know how you're all going to see him, but this is Charlie. We're calling this Charlie's bill, and I'll tell you our story. Thank you so much. If you have loved ones in assisted living facilities, you need to know that they have no legal protection. Assisted living residents are being evicted without cause at an alarming rate, and there is nothing they can do about it. They have no recourse. Facilities can appeal infractions, but the residents cannot. Involuntary discharge is the primary complaint received by our long-term care ombudsman every year. Let me tell you what happened to us several years ago. My husband, Charlie, was in assisted living because he had Alzheimer's disease and needed more care than I could give him. The facility offered 4 levels of care, from beginning stage Alzheimer's to end of life, which is the only outcome. There is no cure for Alzheimer's. This was critical, that he stay there in the facility and never move again, because Alzheimer's patients do not relocate well. It's called transfer trauma, and it cost Charlie his life. He died 9 days after being illegally evicted. After Charlie had been in this facility for 10 months, he was upgraded from level 2 to level 3 of their 4 care levels. 2 weeks later, he and 5 other residents were evicted in violation of our contract, our service agreement, and every single state regulation on involuntary discharge. They simply fired nurses and got rid of the residents most in need of care. They did everything wrong. No 30-day notice, no doctor's authorization, no cause for discharge. Let me be clear, Charlie was not a behavior problem. None of these 6 residents who were evicted had those aggressive, combative behaviors that you keep hearing about that are so often attributed to Alzheimer's patients. Quite the opposite. None of them was a problem to anybody. I immediately reported to KDADS, Kansas Department on Aging and Disability Services, what was going on. They conducted an investigation and filed a report. They did not issue a plan of correction or any fines. They told me they had held the facility accountable, but when I asked, what did you do? They hung up on me. Open records confirmed that they had done nothing. I contacted countless attorneys seeking help. They all turned me down. They said no laws were broken, so we can't make a case. I went to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division for help and provided them with documented evidence of everything that had happened. They sat on my case an entire year, and then they dropped it and refused to meet with me until my state senator intervened. Then they told me, we can't help you. There's nothing we can do. We need better laws. That from the Attorney General. House Bill 2004 is the long overdue bill that gives assisted living residents the right to file an appeal and have a hearing when they're victims of unwarranted eviction. And as you've said, nursing home residents already have this right due to federal law. But most care homes in Kansas are not nursing homes. They're assisted living type facilities under state jurisdiction only. And the state does not allow assisted living residents to appeal involuntary discharge. House Bill 2004 gives this legislature the opportunity to step up and do the right thing, to protect assisted living residents from the physical, financial, and emotional trauma that we went through. You can stop this unconscionable abuse of our loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. We'll take questions after all of the testimony, if you wouldn't mind sticking around for a little while. Okay, next up we have Barbara Hickert, Office of the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. And we have her virtually.
Good afternoon. Am I connected?
Good afternoon. Yeah, we can hear you.
This is my first time testifying virtually, so I wasn't sure if I was working right.
We can hear you and we can see you.
Thank you. My name is Barbara Hickert. I'm the State Long-Term Care Ombudsman. I want to thank you for this opportunity to provide our testimony today in support of House Bill 2004. Our agency advocates for the rights of individuals in adult care homes throughout our state. This includes nursing home residents, but also residents in assisted living facilities, residential health care facilities, home pluses, board and care homes. It is the residents in these facilities that you will be helping today if you pass this legislation. As you've heard, this is the most common complaint that we investigate. It has represented about 10% of the cases that we have investigated over the past 10 years. In 2020, it did drop a little bit and become our second largest complaint. This is not because we saw a decrease in the numbers. We actually had an increase, but because other resident rights complaints increased related to the pandemic, as you might be able to imagine. In my testimony, I've included 3 different stories or examples of some work that we've done on this issue. One of the things I want to talk about in the first case and point out is that this facility is a residential healthcare facility. This facility was built for and it specializes in the care of individuals with Alzheimer's and other dementias. They've made it their job to know how to take care of these residents with dementia. It's their job to understand how to approach confused residents. It's a job to train their staff to know how to care for these residents. It is a normal part of dementia for our residents to have periods of agitation. It is normal for them to not be able to express their needs the way you and I can, and for sometimes to have those unmet needs or the agitation that they're experiencing to result in some challenging behaviors. But it's the facility's job to understand that and to understand how to help those residents. Involuntary discharges matter because of the potential for harm that it causes to vulnerable residents. Most of us can agree that change is hard, moving is stressful, but imagine how much more so this is when it is forced upon vulnerable elders who may not understand what's happening, who have already left their homes and their possessions and their lives behind to move into a long-term care facility just to be evicted from it. The response to this stress can negatively affect those residents' physical, emotional, and psychological health. Many times, such as in example number 3 that I've shared with you, those residents are moved further away from their family and their other support systems. Without those relationships and the supports, the very issues that resulted in the discharge are likely to increase, setting up the resident for another eviction, which we see happen fairly regularly. In my testimony, I've requested 2 improvements, both of which are already requirements for nursing homes. Number 1, adding a requirement the facility send a copy of the written notice of transfer or discharge to our office. This has been a requirement for nursing homes since 2007. Receiving these notices has helped us to reach out to residents to offer our services, explain the rules, provide them with options, and if they are going to be transferred to another facility, to help them with that transition, and then to follow up with them afterward in their new home to make sure they're doing well. We also have concerns about the requirement to file that notice of appeal within 15 days. This requirement could put an unnecessary pressure on residents and their families at a difficult, challenging, and confusing time. We've seen notices delayed by mail. We've seen notices of the intent to appeal get lost in the mail just in the last few months. We've seen notices too often give incorrect information about how to appeal, which would waste valuable time while residents are headed down the wrong path. Residents are often hospitalized when they're given these notices of discharge and focused on their acute care needs rather than on this issue. We acknowledge that there are valid reasons why a facility might need to involuntarily discharge a resident. These reasons are spelled out in current regulations. If every facility were following these regulations, if every facility was disclosing the level of care that they can and cannot provide prior to admission, if every facility were providing the care they promised to provide at admission, if there was always open and honest communication with the residents and the residents' representatives throughout that stay, we probably wouldn't be here today. But there are many times when discharges are done inappropriately, when they're done for the wrong reasons, when they're done without proper notice, when they're done with no notice at all. Residents are being discharged to homeless shelters, to hotels, to family members' homes who are not in any way able to care for the residents' needs. And just one more example, I would tell you about an involuntary discharge where the facility's discharge plan was to send the resident to her son's home. Again, rarely a proper plan, but in this case, made even worse by the fact that this facility had reported this same son to Adult Protective Services for abuse and neglect. Twice. This bill would give residents in these facilities the legal right to question the facility's decision, to give another level of oversight, and to help give residents a voice in determining whether it's appropriate for them to remain in the facility or not. I thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony, and I'm happy to answer questions you have.
Thank you. We're going to take questions after everyone testifies. So our next conferee is Dustin Baker. Dustin, are you with us?
Hi, Madam Chairwoman. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Madam Chairwoman and members of the House Committee, my name is Dustin Baker, and I am testifying in permanent testimony on behalf of House Bill 2004. And for those of you guys who don't know me, I'm an advanced practice registered nurse, family nurse practitioner, and nurse educator with over 20 years. But most importantly, I am the grandson of Larry Barrett, who is a resident of a long-term care facility who was involuntarily discharged while he was in the hospital. His long-term care facility had sent him to a behavioral health facility for dementia-related communication difficulties that resulted in him becoming both verbally and physically aggressive. Subsequently, he was transferred to a higher level of care due to a medical emergency. When he was deemed medically stable, We attempted to get him back to the facility. However, the facility declined to accept him back. The nursing home actually had called me to let me know that they would not be accepting him. They would be issuing a notice of discharge per the guidance of KDADS. And I had to remind the facility of their state and federal regulatory requirements under 43.15 of appropriate transfer and discharge. After receiving the discharge notice, I then filed an appeal with the Administrative Hearing Office and filed a complaint with KDADS in regards to the involuntary discharge that did not meet federal or state regulatory requirements for an involuntary discharge. I then received a second notice from the nursing home that still did not meet federal or state regulatory requirements. So therefore, I filed another complaint with KDADS. Finally, after more than 3 months of being in the hospital, subjected to a hospital-acquired infection resulting in sepsis, my grandfather Larry was able to return to his home after the facility decided the day before the administrative hearing to allow him to come back. If it had not been for the federal regulatory requirements allowing him the right to appeal his discharge, who knows where he might have ended up today. As a nurse and a provider and family member, I strongly urge you guys to support House Bill 2004. Without it, our vulnerable residents and our adult care facilities will not receive the same protections that my grandfather were afforded. No resident or family member deserves to suffer the negative emotional and physical effects that an involuntary discharge causes. Once again, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to offer some insight into my family's story, and I will be open for any questions if you guys have them.
Thank you, Dustin. We'll go to our next conferee, Margaret Farley, Kansas Advocates for Better Care. Do we have Margaret? Okay, we'll move on to Jamie Gideon, Kansas Alzheimer's Association.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Margaret's with us. Margaret?
Okay. Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Sorry, I think you were muted.
I was, and I think I did that to myself.
Well,
Pardon me for
welcome to
that.
the committee.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on behalf of Kansas Advocates for Better Care, which is a 46-year-old nonprofit totally dedicated to advocating for better long-term care. And that's what we've done since our inception. I thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 2004, the Kansans' right to administrative appeal of assisted living facility evictions, or what we call Charlie's Bill, who was just introduced to you by Rachel Imthern. We're here today because of her 10-year-long work to try to right the wrong for other families that she and her husband suffered. We also wish to express our sincere gratitude to Mrs. Imthern's legislator, Representative Highland, for introducing House Bill 2004. And based on some of the questions prior to the hearing, I think a little history is needed to illustrate some of the reasons to support House Bill 2004. In 1987, the Nursing Home Reform Act, for the first time, gave nursing home residents the right to appeal an involuntary eviction. Before that time, people who lived in nursing facilities were entirely subjected to the rule of law created within the facility and within the contract by the owners and operators. Essentially, it was considered a property right of the entity that owned and operated the facility, and they could choose whether or not a resident was able to stay in the facility. About the same time that the nursing home reform law was passed, Medicare and Medicaid had created conditions of participation. So if facilities wanted to have the benefits of Medicare and Medicaid certification, the government was then requiring that they meet certain conditions of participation, and those contained resident rights. And one of the resident rights that was contained in that was the protection against involuntary transfer and discharge. And it was the right to have the ability that there were limited conditions under which the owner in management could discharge you. They were limited. Essentially, that does follow what the language is in House Bill 2004, is basically come from the Nursing Home Reform Act. And this appeal process was provided to residents for the very first time. The assisted living facilities they are flourishing in this state, and I think everyone wants them to flourish in this state. But right now we have an unequal system for appealing evictions from nursing facilities and from as compared with assisted living facilities. And this includes the different types of assisted living facilities, which are licensed as an assisted living facility. There's a type called the assisted living facility. There's a type called residential health care, and there's a type called Home Plus. And these facilities are bound by regulations that are on the books right now, but they are meaningless for assisted living facilities because there is no right to appeal the decision of the facility to evict a person from an assisted living facility residence. And that's why Mrs. Imthern and her husband did not have the right to appeal. It simply wasn't on the books. The reason it was on the books for nursing homes is because of Medicare and Medicaid certification. Around the time of the nursing home reform law, the state agency created regulations that essentially mirrored what was the law in the nursing home reform law.
Margaret,
that is what.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but you've gone a little bit over time.
Okay.
Can you wrap up in a couple sentences?
Sure. We would just urge the committee to pass favorably House Bill 2004 to be able to provide the rights that nursing home residents do, and to put them on an equal footing so that we have the same rights across the long-term care residential continuum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, and I'm sorry I had to interrupt. Next up, we have Jamie Gideon from Kansas Alzheimer's Association.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Concanon, and members of the House Children and Seniors Committee. My name again is Jamie Gideon. I am the Kansas Director of Public Policy for the Alzheimer's Association. Again, thank you for affording me the opportunity to testify in favor of HB 2004. Persons with dementia are particularly affected by involuntary discharge because their disease will only get worse and because of the trauma experienced when they are transferred. As some others have mentioned before, the Nursing Home Reform Law of 1987 protects residents of nursing homes from involuntary transfer and discharge, but does not protect residents of assisted living centers, which are usually regulated by state law. Residents of assisted living communities should have the same rights regarding transfers as nursing home residents do by establishing an appeals process. I ask that you support this bill because it will enhance the quality of life in residential settings and protect persons with dementia. Thank you, committee, and I will take questions at an appropriate time.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Next up is Mike Burgess with Disability Rights Center of Kansas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you just announced, I'm Mike Burgess with the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. I'm the Director of Policy and Outreach. And we exist because of federal law, and there's one of us in every state, so we're part of a nationwide network, and we are here to advocate on behalf of individuals with disabilities. So today, obviously, I'm here to share our support for House Bill 2004, otherwise known as Charlie's Bill. And this seems like a very common sense approach to fill the void in rights that exist today for these seniors and individuals with disabilities who reside in these settings. And so I just want to echo what the previous conferees have said and urge your support for House Bill or for Charlie's Bill, and urge you to recommend it favorably for passage. And I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
All right, thanks, Mike. Next up, we have Judy Davis Cole, AARP.
Yes, Representative. I was not called to testify on 2004. Mine is for testimony for 2114.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm
listed on
there.
That's okay. We've got you on the wrong bill. Okay. We're very flexible this year. We're all learning.
I might add that AARP is in strong support of House Bill 2004. It's just that I'm not prepared to do the testimony.
Okay.
I do know that we support it.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. So committee, I'll draw your attention to two pieces of written only testimony that you should have received in your email or can access through the website. One from Kansas Summers, Kansas State Nurses Association, and Callie Denton, Kansas Trial Lawyers Association. Do we have questions, committee, of any of the proponents? I'll just have time for a couple of questions. If you have a burning question. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very quickly, and any of the proponents can answer to it. This is harrowing, what we're hearing that's happening there. Are there any, can they speak to any whistleblowers that are observing this activity happening? What are the protections that they currently have? And does Charlie's Bill address or cover that?
Barbara Hickert, the ombudsman, would you want to respond to that?
I don't believe I see anything that addresses whistleblowers within that. I will tell you that we do hear from facility staff that are reporting to us issues that are happening kind of under the radar. And I point to my example number 2. I mentioned, I think, number 3, where the resident was in a nursing facility, then transferred into the other side of the campus where there was residential health care, and then issued an involuntary discharge. At one point, one Friday afternoon, we received some correspondence from a staff member wanting us to know that the facility intended to take that resident to a homeless shelter within the hour. And we were able to then stop that because of that. But I don't know that, that's an example of where we've experienced that, but I don't know that there's any protections for them in this bill or where those protections would be.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. Are you good? Okay, Representative Helmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I see the fiscal note is a little high, but it sounds reasonable. But and I know it's hard to ask for intent, but can anybody answer if that intention is to settle some kind of, maybe if they lose their case, to find them somewhere else to stay? Or to, without leaving them, and someone asked that previously.
Does anybody want to address that? Did you have that Were you asking a particular conferee?
I couldn't remember who asked that question or who was addressing it, but I'm hoping that they just don't leave them out in the cold, that fiscal note would kind of cover that. The fiscal note mentions that there would be a lot of attorneys involved in that. So I was hoping that was the intent with that fiscal note.
I would think so, but
Anybody know?
any of the conferees want to address that? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Rachel, yeah, come up to the microphone, please.
Current state regulations state that after this 30-day written notice, the facility will assist the resident in the appropriate measures for finding a move. But when you didn't get the 30-day notice, that never happened.
Okay, thanks for responding. Do you have a quick one, or can you hold it? Representative Neighbor.
Just one quick response. Somebody asked if they were left out in the cold, and the answer is yes, they are. We've had this happen in Kansas City. Star has reported on it, and it's not uncommon. It is a sad event, but it does happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've got to move on. If you have other questions, please get a hold of one of the conferees individually. So I don't show any neutral conferees on this, but we have opponent testimony. And first up, I'll call on Rachel Monger from Leading Age Kansas. Rachel.
Very much, Madam Chair, and I am Rachel Monger with Leading Age Kansas. Hopefully all of you remember me from last week talking to you, and we are here opposed to the bill, but I do want to make it clear that none of our objections to this bill are meant to discount or disrespect any of the stories you have heard today. There are issues in assisted living, some of them heart-wrenching. And our only point today is that we do not believe this bill is the right solution for that. Second, throughout my testimony, I'll refer to assisted living, but it's also, because that's the most common, but it's also shorthand for some of these other settings that are included in the bill. And then we've also heard some of the proponents refer to these dementia care assisted livings. And that's not something we have in our membership, and it's a small minority, so I'm not going to touch that part of any of the stories you've heard. I've also submitted 4 pages of written testimony to you. It is dense. I wouldn't go through all of it with you even if we had the time, but I know that many of you are brand new to senior care, and so I just wanted to try in the best way possible to present a lot of those background information and references for you. So in a nutshell, assisted living, other residential care settings are an extremely important part of the senior care system. It's an affordable option for seniors who need some help, but not a nursing home level of care. And it's one that has worked well for hundreds of thousands of Kansans for decades now. It was invented in the early 80s. And of course, you might get annoyed hearing me say this many times, but they are not nursing homes. They are their own thing. Kansas laws and regulations are written to make sure that they aren't used as nursing homes, and you'll see more about that in my written testimony. So I'm just going to skip straight to what we believe are the dangers around House Bill 2004. The bill does allow a resident to stay in the assisted living until their appeal is finished. Due to the process set out in the bill and the fact that the resident can keep appealing that discharge through multiple agency levels until they get to the district court and beyond, we're not just looking at weeks but months. That you will have a resident who is staying in assisted living who cannot meet their needs. That's really an impossible situation for the provider and a very dangerous one for the resident. The same can be said of residents with dementia who are displaying what you heard about the physically or sexually aggressive behaviors, not uncommon. Not only is that a danger to those residents, it's a danger to the residents and staff around them. Next, talk about cost. Assisted living is accessible for so many people because of the cost. It's half the cost of a nursing home or even less, depending on your service needs. And it costs less because it doesn't provide the care and services of a nursing home. Assisted living doesn't staff anywhere remotely close to a nursing home. There's also no clinical teams, no specialized services, and very few of the physical environment needs that you would need for higher levels of care. And if forced to act like a nursing home, assisted living will have to start charging like nursing homes for all residents. And we believe that would not be a good thing for Kansans who are in need of that middle tier. You will also see in my testimony some explanation of what we believe would be the market reactions to House Bill 2004. And we say that because we've seen a similar thing happen for nursing homes. And that is shutting out some seniors from assisted living options, particularly people with dementia, or they'll be pushed to really low quality providers who do not care about whether they're getting the care and services that they need. Also, a valid concern are lawsuits and regulatory fines. If assisted living are required to keep caring for someone that they actually cannot care for, that of course does leave them open for some very serious regulatory punishment and lawsuits around that. It really is an unfair and potentially ruinous situation for some of our providers. We also do believe, you'll see at the end of my testimony, that even if allowed to pass, it doesn't resolve what we believe from what our members see is the actual complaint about discharges in assisted living. Not all of them, but some of the ones that our members see. And that is not enough consumer awareness and education and not enough provider transparency regarding the role of assisted living and the limits of care it can provide. We know there are some providers out there who are saying or maybe heavily implying to potential residents that this is your home for life, when in many cases that's not going to be true, and we think it's wrong. It does need to be addressed. And so we believe that finding ways to improve that education and that transparency for consumers will go a long way to greatly reduce some of the very understandable anger and confusion and surprise when a resident has a facility tell them that they can no longer meet their needs, or in our parlance, they no longer meet resident criteria. So thank you for allowing us to testify today, and obviously I'll answer any questions the best I can.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. We'll wait till the end. Next up, Linda Mowbray, Kansas Healthcare Association, Kansas Center for Assisted Living.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me with committee today. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes.
Very good. Well, I do appreciate the opportunity to come before you today. House Bill 2004 is well-meaning, but to echo some of Rachel's sentiments, the population that's being served in assisted living facilities is generally at a different acuity level than in a skilled nursing home. The Kansas regulations are set out, first of all, to talk about admission, transfer, and discharge. That's actually done in, as my testimony says, KAR 2639-102, the admission, transfer, discharge. And there are already provisions in that admission, transfer, discharge regulation, and specifically in section G, that say we have to notify the ombudsman when we're doing a discharge. It's already there. So there are some redundancies in House Bill 2004. Nearly every provision in there, except for section E, is already on the books. So there should be enforcement availability through KDADS if a facility is a bad actor. So I'd like to talk to you about a couple of different scenarios, if you will.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt, but we are running short on time. So could you summarize those two?
Yes, certainly. Different scenarios are simply that, if it's a matter of physically unable to care for a person's need, whether it is an emergency where they have to be discharged immediately, or whether a 30-day notice is given, there is a real danger for the individual to not be able to get the care needs and that those around them might not be met. There's also a very realistic fee that is involved with this. If an individual has care needs that the facility cannot meet, who is going to pay for that extra charge if nurses need to come in or if there are additional services needed? The other side of this is there is a provision that says for non-payment of bill, an individual can be discharged. As Rachel had mentioned, that there are layers and layers of appeal rights that may be going on, and it can be months before those appeal processes are seen through. If the individual's not paying the bill, needs a guardian, has family members that are not coming through, it's truly back on the facility for covering that, if you will. Finally, ethical marketing. I've attached to my testimony a document called The Power of Ethical Marketing, and it is a tenet by which the National Center for Assisted Living and the Kansas Center for Assisted Living, which I represent, truly follow. And if you look at the tenets that are in that ethical marketing, and if we can practice those across the state, then I think a lot of these problems would disappear on their own. Assisted livings are not in the business of discharging people. They want to have people come live with them. With that, I'll stand for questions, and I thank you.
All right, thank you, Linda. Okay, next up we have Mark Schulte, Kansas Adult Care Executives.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Concanon and members of the committee. I'm representing the Kansas Adult Care Executives, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit professional association serving nursing home administrators and assisted living operators. Our membership includes 300 individual administrators and operators from both the nonprofit and for-profit adult sectors. We're located throughout Kansas, and there are administrators of owners of their facilities. I would echo what Linda and Rachel said as well, and all of the things. When discharge is not done as it is intended, absolutely there should be some recourse there. But as I read the bill and I heard it read at the beginning of this, I have the regulations in front of me, and it outlines virtually everything that's in this bill of what we have to do, the timelines we have to give to the people, the contact information for the Kansas Ombudsman, the contact information for the complaint department, in this case, which would be KDAD. So these are state license only facilities that, because of funding, are funded by almost exclusively by private pay dollars. I don't think anybody on this call would doubt the virtue of aging in place. Aging in the same place that's become your home is always always more beneficial. I agree 100% with what Rachel said at the beginning. Moving is very traumatic, but when the service provider is not right, then it becomes a necessity from a medical point of view. And that's where we need to be concerned, because if you're doing this right, the conversation should begin probably 60 days before you're at a discharge point. And hopefully those conversations lead to an agreement between family, resident, and provider to say, we are no longer an appropriate place to provide care to this person. So how can we help you find that? When they refuse to do that, then we're left with a 30-day option in doing that. And we include all of these things in these avenues, including the ombudsman. And I've done this for 16 years and worked with people with disabilities for 15 years before that. I've never had an experience with an ombudsman that wasn't beneficial or wasn't reasonable. But when we're not the right place, we need to be able to discharge them to the place that is, because otherwise, in many cases, we may be providing care that's beyond the scope of what we're licensed to. We end up stretching our finite resources in a manner that compromise other people's care and safety. And if we end up in a position where we are forced to provide somebody care during that appeal process, when we have made a subjective clinical decision, and if we're doing it the way we should be doing it, the resident's doctor has been included in that decision and is in agreement of moving to a different provider. If we are doing the things like that, to then be forced to continue providing that care really becomes not only burdensome on the provider, but it puts other residents at risk because you're stretching those resources even thinner. One of the biggest challenges in all this is because we're private pay in assisted living, when we make a recommendation that yes, somebody needs more care, which is long-term care, as Rachel said, that is twice as expensive. And I can guarantee nobody has ever been, that I've had to do this with, has ever been happy about that decision, about having to pay twice as much for the care. So that can become, hypothetically can become really the sticking point to make us forced to do that, to continue providing care that we're not able to, when the primary objection in reality is just, I don't want to pay for the more expensive care. And I understand that. But this has to be, the process has to be a cooperation with the family, the resident, and the provider to find the right place. I mean,
Sorry to interrupt. You've gone a little bit over. Do you want to wrap up a little bit?
Sure. In wrapping up, the only thing I would say, that forcing a provider who believes they're not the right provider to continue providing care is analogous to somebody walking into a minor emergency care with chest pains and saying, I'm not leaving until somebody comes and does the bypass surgery that I need. We're asking, by forcing that, we're asking somebody to provide care that they're not expert in and may not be licensed to provide. Thank you for the opportunity. I certainly be willing to take any questions from anybody.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate you guys that you're willing to take questions, but we've got another bill hearing. So if you all have questions, I think if we start, we're going to be opening a can of worms that we're not going to be able to wrestle in. So I think if you've got questions, if you could contact those folks individually, we can help you with any contact information that you might need. It's probably on their testimony. So with that, and then I'd also add, especially for you new people, normally when we're having a bill hearing and everyone's in front of us, we have time cards. So we don't have this awkward situation of having to interrupt people. And I certainly don't like doing it, but I also have people here for another hearing. So with that, I'm going to close the bill hearing for House Bill 2004. And we will open the hearing on House Bill 2114, establishing the Kansas Senior Care Task Force. And I'll start with you, Jesse.
Thank you, Chairwoman, members of the committee. House Bill 2114 creates the Kansas Senior Care Task Force. This section establishes what the task force will review, who will be on the task force, methods of appointment, meeting requirements, the records, and required reports to the legislature. Subsection A lists the task force topics of study. Those topics include the provision of care for Kansas seniors, the administration of antipsychotic medications to adult care home residents, safeguards to prevent abuse, the surveying and fines for adult care homes, implementation of the Kansas Senior Care Act, and daycare resources. Subsection B lists the members that will be on the task force. There are 20 members, and vacancies are filled by appointment in the same manner that they are originally appointed. The membership includes the following, and it's quite a long list, so if you bear with me. The chair of Public Health and Welfare, the vice chair of public health and welfare, the minority member of the public health and welfare, those same 3 members for the House Children and Seniors, a representative from KDADS, a representative from KDHE, the state long-term care ombudsman or their designee, an elder law attorney appointed by the governor, a representative of the Area Agencies on Aging, a representative of the Kansas Adult Care Executives Association, a rep from Leading Age Kansas, a rep from Kansas Healthcare Association, a rep from Kansas Advocates for Better Care, a rep from Kansas Hospital Association, a rep from Community Mental Health Centers, a representative of an adult care home appointed by KDADS, a representative of the American Association of Retired Persons, and a representative from the Home and Community-Based Services community. The chairperson of the task force first will be the chairperson of House Children and Seniors, and then the vice chairperson will be the chair from Senate Public Health and Welfare, and then the 2 will alternate at the beginning of each calendar year. These meetings can be held at any time, at any place, in any means in the state of Kansas upon the call of the chair. Quorum is a majority of voting members, and committee action shall be taken by a majority of voting members present during a quorum. The task force is then directed to submit a preliminary report of these studied topics to the legislature before the 2022 session, and then a final report is required to report to the legislature before the 2023 session. Those reports will include recommendations for improvements regarding the well-being of seniors in Kansas. And when requested, KDADS will provide data and information, and when requested, the Revisor's Office and Legislative Research will provide support, and when approved by the LCC, members will be paid for these meetings as well. The provisions of this section is to expire on June 30th of 2023, and this section would be effective upon publication in the Kansas Register. And I'm available for any questions regarding House Bill 2114.
Committee, do we have any questions for Jesse on the bill? Okay, thanks, Jesse. We'll jump right into the proponents. And first up, we have Rachel Monger, Leading Age Kansas. Welcome back, Rachel.
Keep it very short. Clearly, we have a lot of very big, very heart-wrenching, very complex issues in long-term care, and they do not get enough discussion, attention, or solutions. I mean, that's the thing we're always looking for. And so we very much support this task force, and believe it or not, will be our first opportunity we have ever done anything like this for long-term care, which is kind of sad, but it's true. And so again, we really support it, and all the people that we saw listed to be on the task force, the whole list makes a lot of sense. It's all a lot of unique perspectives, knowledge, and expertise that each of them would bring. So if passed, we really look forward to working with everyone on that.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Next up, Dustin Baker.
Madam Chair and members of the House, thank you guys for allowing me to testify in favor of this. I'm not going to go into complete details, but kind of draw on my previous testimony, and that my grandfather was involuntarily discharged, and I filed multiple complaints with KDADS, and they conducted a survey on October 21st, and they cited the facility with 2 F-tag deficiencies. As part of those deficiencies, it included it failed to respond to ensure open communication about the goal of the discharge of my grandfather, receiving with the receiving facility and finding alternative placement at the time the discharge order was issued. While he was in the hospital without all required documentation, without allowing him to return to the facility to appeal the discharge. The report goes on to identify that they failed to meet his need, or they failed to identify the inability to meet his needs. The facility developed a plan of correction that was completed by the facility and was accepted by KDADS, which did not include a remedy for which they were cited. It did not meet federal or state regulatory requirements, nor did it allow my grandfather to return to the facility. One of the corrections identified that the facility reached out to the hospital to inform them that they weren't able to meet his needs and that they needed to refer him to state hospital for which he medically did not need. I begged and pleaded with KDADS multiple times to not accept the plan of care as it didn't meet the regulatory requirements. The state ombudsman's office and the Kansas Advocates for Better Care both made the same request. However, our requests were unanswered by the department. It took numerous phone calls, emails, and pleas with KDADS to finally receive the 2567B and the POC, plan of care, that's supposed to be posted on the website. I will ascertain that the facility would receive, it was ascertained that the facility would receive a monetary fine and an enforcement letter if they did not admit my grandfather to the next available bed. Based upon the available information as of today, it appears that they never received any of those fines. And as you guys can hear from my testimony and read from it, a senior care task force is essential to the protection of seniors. I am strongly in favor of this bill. However, I do have an issue with the bill, and that is that of the 20 proposed members on there, there's 6 advocacy groups, but there's not one public consumer on the committee at all. While these representatives offer a diverse background of knowledge and expertise, no one can speak for all seniors' needs or tell their stories better than they can or their representative. That's why I asked this committee here to consider the House Bill 2114 with the additional requirements of adding public members to the task force. This is a crucial step to ensure that all parties are fairly representative and the senior needs are being adequately met. Once again, I am open for questions if you guys at an appropriate time.
Thank you. Next conferee is Judy Davis Cole from AARP.
Chair and the committee members. My name is Judy Davis Cole, and I serve as a member of the AARP Kansas Executive Council. I'm a retired master's prepared nurse of 42 years, and I spent many years caring for seniors in their homes and in their communities from that perspective. On the behalf of 291,000 members of AARP in Kansas, we thank you for the opportunity to speak with you in support of House Bill 2114, which will develop the Senior Care Task Force. AARP stands ready and committed to contribute as a member of the task force. The task force will serve Kansas seniors by addressing a wide range of matters that impact them, their families, and their communities. These issues include not only these very serious ones that we just heard from Jesse Pringle, but they're not limited to that. Other issues that we think the task force will be vitally important to are such things such as access to quality health care, caregiving, caregiver support, financial security, affordable and reliable housing and utilities, and support for veterans and the military and their families. It can also explore ways to allow seniors to remain active and vital participants within their communities. I'm just going to remind you of a couple of stats. I know that you're pretty much aware of them, but the number of Americans aged 65 and older is projected to increase from the current level of 16% of the total population, which is about 52 million, to 23% of the total population by 2060. This is 95 million. Also, life expectancy will increase from the current 78.5 years, getting close there, to 85.6 years. This will continue to drive the demand for long-term services and support. AARP has a lot of information and knowledge to contribute as a member of the task force. We have a vast library of knowledge and expertise on senior issues from a historical and from a current perspective. We partner with world leaders such as the SCAN Foundation and Robert Wood Johnson and Commonwealth Fund to create reports such as the AARP Long-Term Services and Support Scorecard. This rates us nationally on how we stand on addressing care of seniors. I encourage you all to take a look at that long-term services and support scorecard. We collaborate to gather federally reported data and create reports such as the AARP COVID-19 Nursing Home Dashboard. It identifies specific areas of concern in very real time. It's updated every 4 weeks. I also encourage you to take a look at the AARP COVID-19 Nursing Home Dashboard. In 2020, we published the Longevity Economy Outlook, detailing the current and projected economic impact to Kansas by Kansas seniors. There's a link to this report in our written testimony, and we also have a two-sided infographic that we'll be glad to share with you if you're interested. I really encourage you to look at this Longevity Economy Outlook. I think you'll be surprised at some of the profound data that you'll find in there, and it adds another layer of importance to the establishment of this committee. We again thank you, Madam Chair and committee, for your consideration of House Bill 2114 to develop this task force with the inclusion of AARP as a member. We support House Bill 2114, and we respectfully request your support. Thank you.
Judy, next conferee, Linda Mowbray.
Hello, thank you, and welcome. Thank you for having me back. We are proponents for House Bill 2114. We believe that the time has come for a senior care task force. The one thing that we have really noticed with the pandemic is that we are better when we're together, and we can draw strengths from each other. And while we might not always be sitting on the same side of a particular issue, by working together and discovering solutions, we can make things better for Kansans, especially in long-term care. The idea of a senior task force is not a new one, but its time has come. The nursing home profession, the long-term care profession, has been really beaten down by the COVID-19 virus. We have staffing shortages that are critical. We have no one in line to take the place of those that are retiring and leaving the field. We have issues that in order for senior care to continue to strive and be strong and provide a necessary service in Kansas, we have to work together to find those solutions so that we can tell our seniors that, yes, we are there for you. There's many options. And I'll steal the motto or borrow the motto from KDADS that says, assure that Kansans receive the right care at the right time in the right place. I think us working together will go far to achieve that. So we truly do support House Bill 2114 establishing the Senior Care Task Force. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Committee, do we have any, that's all that we have for proponents. Do we have questions for any of the proponents? Representative Penn.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for the for Ms. Mowbray, we received email as well as you heard from, I believe it was Dustin, one of the other folks on there, talking about having consumers on this particular task force. What say you about that? Any thoughts?
I think that the table's big enough for all. I think that having the voices of the people that are being served is a good thing. I do believe that other boards have consumer voice on there, and I know some of the groups have consumer voice, but actually having the consumer, I think that's only good.
Other questions? Is that not a question? Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thanks to the proponents. We've got neutral testimony. Margaret Farley, Kansas Advocates for Better Care.
Thank you, Chair Concanon. Kansas Advocates for Better Care, while we appreciate being named as one of the entities that would serve on the task force, we are testifying as neutral because we are concerned about the limited balance of votes on the committee that are represented by consumers versus providers. And as well, we have concerns about what seems to be a focus on institutional long-term supports and services. And of course, if COVID has taught us anything, it has taught us that we really need to increase the number of community-based services. This will be healthier, and residents and folks, consumers, and people in the community will be achieving what most people generally want. So we're concerned about the balance between the institutional issues that are going to be raised and also with regard to the community-based. And it is community-based services that they're the stepchild. We also think that it is important for the disability community to be represented. We'd like to see the silver-haired legislature, the PACE program, CAPS, the Kansas Adult Protective Services, and a Kansas Guardianship Program. This is going to be a difficult committee to get specific things done. We are in favor of task force to study. It is the case that frequently individual consumers are outweighed by the organizations that are listed, especially when they're from institutional representatives from providers. Also, we think that especially this year, the effect of COVID on the population of nursing home residents, excuse me, and their caregivers has given us a sad opportunity, but a real reason to take a deep look at what went wrong that allowed so many nursing home residents to suffer and die, and so many employees of long-term care facilities. And I'm not pointing the finger at anyone. I'm saying this is an area that's right before us. It's a study that just occurred that we can learn a lot from. And I would hope that we would incorporate that into these issues. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next up, Barbara Hickert, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman.
Good afternoon again. It's Barbara Hickert, State Ombudsman. We are offering neutral testimony today on this bill, not because we don't wholeheartedly support the creation of a task force to look at these very serious issues related to senior services. And I'll be brief. You've heard lots of reasons, and I especially appreciate KBC's comments about what we've experienced in the last year with COVID and what we could use, how we could use that to learn and improve services for our seniors in long-term care facilities. We want to support the bill, but we still believe that there is a need, as many have already expressed, for a voice from consumers. And I want to just point out that our program is really uniquely situated to be able to help identify and support adult care home residents, and also family members that would be willing to bring their voices to this process. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Barbara. Next up, Jamie Gideon, Kansas Alzheimer's Association.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair Concan, members of the House Children and Seniors Committee. In the interest of time, I just want to point out one issue we have with the bill. We are definitely in favor of having a senior task force, but we want to point out in Section 1 of the bill, it reads, the task force shall study the following topics. And the number one topic listed is the provision of care for seniors in the state of Kansas who suffer from Alzheimer's disease, dementia, or other age-related mental health conditions. Because this is listed as a main purpose of the task force, then it seems necessary to have someone from the Alzheimer's Association on the task force as well. So I ask that you add a representative from the Alzheimer's Association on the task force. We also are definitely in favor of having more consumer voices on there as well. Thank you, committee. We'll take questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, that's the last that I have for neutral, and I'm not showing any opponent testimony. Committee, do we have any questions for the neutral or the proponents? I would take any questions right now. Representative Ousley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here. It was stated earlier that there should be enough seats at the table, and that got me to looking back at the Child Welfare Task Force. There were 20 members upon that. But I will point out that there were 23 members on our Appropriations House Committee. Would anybody have objections to pulling up a couple more seats at the table? Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Representative Penn.
The only objection that I would have with more seats to the table, though I agree with it in theory, is price tag. It does say in here that at will, we're supposed to reimburse for any time these are called into session. So I do have a care about that.
Well, and we can have some discussion about this when and if we work the bill, or if and when. The only comment I'll make about that is that we discovered before that once you start that, it doesn't end. Then, you know, everybody wants a seat at the table, so we could easily add 2, or we could add 10, or anyway, keep that in mind as you're having the discussion. But I certainly don't disagree with the having some voices of consumers is important. Any other questions? Representative Wagoner.
Jamie, since you're still up on the screen, I'll direct this to you. The question of additional consumer people, the one testimony listed the Kansas Long-Term Care Ombudsman, the Area Agencies on Aging, AARP, some of these others that are already fundamentally consumer based. Do you not think that's sufficient consumer representation? Or do you, I'm genuinely wonder what your opinion is.
Well, I like first of all, I like the idea of having an actual consumer that's not part of an organization, like was testified previously, someone who maybe has gone through specific issues with their family. I think that's maybe a good representative from the community that could be on there. And then plus, I did point out specifically with the Alzheimer's Association being on there specifically, added to the list. I know we went through this a couple years ago in committee. We did have a few people added, and so that was my only request.
The questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. I will close the hearing on House Bill 2114. And that's all we have on the agenda today. And we will start, no meeting tomorrow. We'll start the week on Monday with a review about an overview of the situation with the vaccines in the state with Dr. Secretary Norman. So have a good weekend. We're adjourned.